Have you ever missed someone so deeply, even though you're not sure they were ever real? When Mara was just 6, she was sent to live with her grandmother in a quiet forest town. That's where she met Mama, a gentle, towering creature hidden deep in the woods. Not a monster, not a beast, but a Bigfoot mother who cradled her childhood with a love more tender than most grown-ups could offer. For months, Mara and her friend Willa played with Mama's children, sharing apples, laughing under trees, and learning a silent language made of trust, glances, and touch. Then one day, Mara was taken back to the city. No goodbyes, just one last glance. Mama's hand on her chest, a quiet farewell. Years later, at age 11, Mara returned. But Willa was gone, and so was the laughter. The forest had changed. Ash, the Bigfoot boy she once played with, was now massive and angry. He didn't recognize her. He attacked. Only one thing stopped him: Mama. Older now, wounded and filled with sorrow. Not for Mara, but for the son who had become something else. Mara never spoke of it. She simply washed off the mud, sat down, and drew Mama again. This time, with her back turned. Time passed. One day, pregnant with her first child, Mara reunited with Willa. They cried, remembered, forgave, and that night, on the porch, Mara heard a familiar whistle from the woods. On the grass lay a single red apple. A quiet message. Mama is still there, still remembering, still watching. But sometimes the most beautiful kindness in your life doesn't come from people at all. Some friendships don't begin with a hello. They begin with a secret. When Mara Bell was 6 years old, she moved to Braddock Hollow, a small town wrapped in pinewood silence and secrets no one said out loud. Her mother packed boxes without looking anyone in the eye, and her father stood on the front porch of their old house in Raleigh like he was carved from stone. No hugs, no tears, just the low thump of the U-Haul door, shutting as Mara climbed in next to a woman who had always felt more like a quiet neighbor than a grandmother. The air in Braddock Hollow smelled like old dirt and apples gone soft. The house creaked in all the wrong ways. Mara was small for her age, soft-spoken, and drawn to shadows more than sunlight. She liked pencils more than people. Her sketchpad was the only thing that followed her from place to place like it actually cared. She would sit under the bay window, listening to the wind slip between the trees like it had something important to say. If only she could understand the language. That's when she first noticed the girl behind the fence. It was a sagging split-rail fence at the far end of her grandmother's yard, where the woods began to thicken and the ground grew wilder. The girl appeared there one day like she'd always been there, barefoot, curls wild and untamed, dress smudged with the kind of dirt that didn't wash out. She looked maybe a year older, but carried herself like she'd been 12 for 3 lifetimes. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. She just stared, curious and unbothered, like Mara was a bird that had flown into the wrong nest. The next day she spoke. "Want to see something weird?" the girl asked, one foot already hooked through the bottom rail, ready to climb. Her name was Willa Keene. Her house sat half-sunk on the other side of the woods, like even it was trying to disappear. She didn't go to school, at least not the one Mara was being enrolled in, and didn't seem to answer to anyone. Willa wore her secrets like necklaces, hanging loose and unapologetic. And something in her eyes said she was used to not being believed. "They're real, you know," Willa whispered that first day they talked. "The ones out there." Mara blinked. "Who? My friends." "But you can't tell. If you tell, they'll leave. Forever." It should have been the kind of thing a child said for attention. But Willa didn't crave attention. She repelled it. Her gaze didn't flinch, and the silence that followed was louder than any joke. "They talk in whistles," Willa added, then puckered her lips and let out a tune so odd, so sharp, it made Mara's neck prickle. "That's how we say we're safe, or that we're near, or that we're near." Mara didn't know why she believed her. Maybe it was the way Willa spoke, like someone who didn't care if you thought she was crazy. Or maybe it was just that Mara needed, someone to tell her there was more to this world than cardboard boxes and grown-up lies. Whatever the reason, she nodded. She'd keep the secret, and so they became something like friends. Not the kind who made bracelets or shared secrets about crushes. They were the kind who walked without speaking, who could sit for an hour staring at a tree and both know what the other was thinking. Mara brought her drawings. Willa brought stale crackers from her pantry. Neither of them cared. One afternoon, Willa led her beyond the fence, into the thicker woods. They walked past twisted trunks and ferns as tall as their knees. Willa was barefoot, of course, stepping over roots like she'd memorized the ground. Mara stumbled twice, but Willa never looked back. Then they stopped. A tree, older than anything Mara had ever seen, stood ahead. Its bark was split and rippled. The kind of bark you wanted to press your hand into just to feel the story hiding beneath it. "This is the place," Willa said softly, and let out that whistle again, low and looping. Silence, just wind. A squirrel, maybe a bird. Then it came. From deeper in the woods, another whistle floated back. Not loud, not close, but real. Mara's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers tightened around her sketch pad. Willa grinned. "They heard us." They sat under that tree until the light began to dim and the sky shifted to ash. No one else came. No figures in the brush. No movement. But the woods felt thicker somehow, like they weren't alone. And Mara, for the first time in weeks, maybe months, didn't feel like she was floating above her life, looking down. She felt rooted. Like maybe she belonged somewhere, even if it wasn't inside the house with her grandmother's TV, always on too loud. Maybe she belonged with the trees, with the wind, with this strange feral girl who talked to invisible friends in the woods. Willa never said much on the walk back. She didn't need to. Mara didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the trees outside rustle against each other like they were passing notes. Her heart was too full to explain. She hadn't laughed, she hadn't cried, but something in her had stretched open like a window. The next day, Willa showed her how to whistle back. Mara tried and failed, but Willa didn't laugh. She just taught her again and again, until Mara got it, crooked and shy, but right enough to be heard. Willa nodded. "Now they'll know you." That afternoon, they returned to the tree, and once again the woods answered, not with growls, not with footsteps, but with a whistle, a soft, deliberate call that echoed through the branches. Mara didn't understand it, not with her ears, but her chest did, her bones did. She turned to Willa, unsure if she should be excited or terrified. Willa just smiled. Wide, reckless, glowing. "I told you," she said. "They're real." And somewhere, behind bark and shadow, something was listening. Something kind, something wild, something waiting. They biked through the forest like it was theirs, like it had always been theirs. Willa led, of course, hair bouncing behind her, wheels kicking up tiny pebbles as they darted down the overgrown trail behind the orchard. Mara followed, her legs working hard to keep pace, her heart already pounding. Not from the ride, but from the quiet promise they'd made that morning. Today was the day. Willa had whispered it like a spell. "They'll come if we call them right." The trail narrowed, swallowed by shadow. Ferns brushed their knees. The air grew cooler, damp with moss and cedar. They ditched the bikes beside a crooked fence post wrapped in wire and vines, then went the rest of the way on foot. Willa moved with that same barefoot grace she always had, as if she'd been born from the forest and left behind by accident. Mara's shoes slipped once on a patch of pine needles, and Willa steadied her without a word. Just a look, like they were already in a different kind of world. One where noise didn't belong. The trees parted suddenly, revealing a slouching treehouse hidden among the limbs. It leaned against a dying maple like it had given up on the idea of growing older. One wall was missing. Ropes hung limp like broken arms. It wasn't much, but it looked like it had once been a place where someone, maybe Willa, maybe someone long gone, had tried to build a kingdom in the air. They didn't stop. Beyond that clearing, the path twisted deeper, until the light thinned and the wind shifted. They came to a thicket, tall, thorny, half-dead and humming. Not with sound, but with pressure. The kind of presence you don't see, but you feel in the bottom of your teeth. Willa knelt, touching the earth with her fingers, then gave a soft whistle, a new one, slower, more careful. She looked back. "Don't move too fast," she said, "even if you see something." Mara nodded. The air went still. A flicker, barely motion, behind the brush. Then she saw her. A small figure crouched low behind a shrub, not hiding exactly, but watching. Her fur was dark and smooth, like wet bark after rain. Her eyes, though, they were golden brown, large, deep, not scared, but cautious. Willa lifted her hand and sat cross-legged on the ground. Mara mirrored her, unsure if her heart had stopped or sped up. The creature moved a little closer, each step gentle, testing. She looked young. No older than them, if that could even be measured. Not human, no, but not beast either. Then came another sound, heavier, closer. A second one stepped out, half from behind a tree. Taller, broader, shoulders like boulders under thick, bristled fur. His eyes were darker, sharper. He didn't crouch. He stood, staring right at Mara. She couldn't breathe. Her chest tightened, and her hands gripped the grass. She didn't cry, not yet, but the panic was already swirling. The boy thing, he wasn't cruel in his gaze, but he was unreadable, like looking into a fire and not knowing if it meant warmth or burning. Then something shifted. The woods went quiet in a new way, and she stepped out. From the trees, from the shadows, from some place just beyond knowing, came Mama. There was no other word for her. She was taller than any human, taller than most fear. But her posture was soft, her movements slow, like the wind. Her fur was a mix of silver and brown, touched by time. Her eyes, they held the ache of someone who had watched too much and spoken too little. She saw Mara, and she stopped, and she bent. Not low like an animal, but like someone offering apology or greeting. One enormous hand rose to her chest, fingers wide, strong, gentle, and stayed there. A gesture, something old, something careful. Mara's fear broke like a brittle twig. It didn't vanish. It transformed. Her tears welled, but not from terror. From something else. From the strangeness of being seen, understood, without a word spoken. Mama didn't step closer. She didn't reach, but she waited. Willa, beside her, just smiled softly, like she'd known this would happen, like it always did eventually. Mara reached for her sketch pad with trembling fingers, and for a few moments no one moved. The little girl creature crept forward then, bolder now, curious. Her movements reminded Mara of raccoons she'd once seen in a zoo. Playful, sharp, unafraid. She sniffed the edge of Mara's shoe. Her fingers tugged gently at Willa's curls. Willa laughed, not loud, but real, and the creature clicked her teeth into life. But the boy didn't move. He watched, studied. His eyes never left Mara's. It was Willa who broke the silence. "That's Ash," she said softly. "He's the one you gotta earn." Mama gave a low breath, almost a hum, and the forest seemed to respond. Birds returned. The tension dropped, but didn't leave entirely. Willa handed Mara a slice of apple from her bag, nudged her chin toward the little girl. "She likes those." The creature snatched it gently, chewed and sat close. Ash finally stepped back, as if satisfied. For now. Mama's hand was still on her chest. Still that same quiet gesture. Mara whispered, "Why does she do that?" Willa paused, choosing her words. "She is sorry. She always is. For what we feel." Mara blinked at that. "Especially when we're scared," Willa said. There was a silence, heavier than before. Then Mama looked up at the sky, then at the kids, then, finally, back at Mara. Her expression hadn't changed, but something in her eyes shimmered, like grief, or hope, or both. They didn't stay much longer. Willa knew when enough was enough. They walked back in near silence. Mara turned around once, just once, and Mama was still there, standing, watching. That night, Mara drew her by candlelight, every line slow, every stroke careful. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be, because she would remember, not the details, not even the face, but the feeling of being terrified and still welcomed. The feeling of something vast and strange lowering itself to meet her where she was, on her level. A mother without words, yet full of meaning. And Mara, for the first time in her life, didn't feel like someone needing to be saved. She felt seen. And somewhere, out in those trees, something had smiled. Not because it had to, but because it chose to. The days that followed blurred like watercolor, soft around the edges, smeared with light, noise, scent, but always ending in the same place. The edge of the woods, the sound of feet crunching pine needles, the whistle that meant they were coming. Mara had stopped trying to explain it to herself. Some things weren't meant to be taken apart. They were meant to be felt. And these afternoons with Willa, the offerings they carried, the slow way the forest answered, this was something you felt in your ribs before you ever understood it with your head. They started bringing little things. A chipped metal lunchbox filled with windfall apples, a plastic slinky tangled and half-broken, a stuffed raccoon with one eye missing, old cereal bars from Willa's cabinet, dandelions in a rusted tin can. No one had told them to bring gifts, but it felt right. Like showing up to a stranger's porch with empty hands wasn't something you did. Even if the strangers didn't speak, even if their hands were bigger than your whole head. Clearing by the old tree became their meeting place. The sun filtered through the branches just right there, angled and warm, like a spotlight, like an invitation. The little female creature was always first to arrive. She'd dart out from the brambles with a mischievous glint in her eyes, and an energy that couldn't stay still. She'd yank Willa's curls without warning, duck away laughing. If the twitch of her lips could be called laughing, then tumbled backward in the moss like a kid who didn't know her own size. Mara had started calling her Flicker, in her head at least, because that's what she was. Quick, unpredictable, brilliant in her wildness. Ash came second, always slower, always from the shadows. He never announced himself, just appeared, quiet and watchful, posture coiled like he was waiting to be challenged. He never joined in the play, not with the same ease, but he watched everything, measured it. Mara felt his eyes on her more than anything else, and it wasn't unkind, but it wasn't comfortable either. And then there was Mama. She didn't always come, only when things tipped too far toward chaos, when Flicker got too excited, climbing too high or shrieking too loud. When Ash bared his teeth at a joke that landed wrong. Then she'd arrive, silent, sudden, like a breeze through tall grass, and the whole clearing would hush. Her presence was like the low part of a cello, steady, rich, patient. She never spoke, never made a sound, but her eyes held stories older than the trees around them. She'd stay until things settled. Until the creatures, her children, Her kin, her charges, returned to a kind of calm. Then she'd vanish again, slipping between trunks like fog. Mara started drawing them, at night, by the light of her flashlight under the quilt. She'd sketch with clumsy devotion. Flicker mid-leap, Ash hunched in his usual pose, Mama standing like an ancient statue near the tree. Her notebook filled with fragments of wonder, pieces of a truth no adult would believe. But that was okay. It wasn't theirs to believe. One afternoon, after a string of cloudless days, Mara asked a question. "Why does Mama look so sad?" Willa didn't answer right away. She was balancing an old Tonka truck on a flat rock, watching Flicker sniff at it with curiosity. Then, without looking up, she said it like a fact she'd known her whole life. "Because Ash doesn't look like her." The words didn't make sense at first. Then they did. And when they did, Mara's stomach dropped, just a little. She watched Ash that day with a new kind of attention. He moved differently than Flicker. He was stockier, his eyes darker, almost human in how they darted between people. He didn't mirror Mama the way Flicker did. There was a gap, not just in appearance, in something deeper, a fracture. Later, while Mara was drawing in the dirt with a stick, Ash threw an apple, hard. It came out of nowhere, struck the side of her head, clipped her glasses, sent them flying. The crack of plastic on stone echoed. She gasped, not because of the pain, though her temple throbbed, but because it felt so personal. Ash had been watching her laugh with Flicker, watching the way they played, watching her be part of something. And in that moment, he decided to break it. Willa froze. Flicker darted away, startled. And from the trees, Mama stepped out. But she didn't scold Ash. She didn't growl or snap. She walked straight to Mara, slow, intentional. She looked down, not at the broken glasses, not at the blood beating near Mara's brow, but at Mara herself. Her hand, larger than Mara's entire torso, reached out and gently circled the girl into her chest. It wasn't fast, it wasn't tight, but it was everything. Mara leaned in before she realized she was doing it. The fur was soft and warm and smelled like rain and wood smoke. She didn't cry, not then, but something inside her cracked quietly, like a tree bending in wind. Ash stood frozen nearby, face unreadable. Mama didn't look at him, but Mara did, and she saw it for a split second. Not pride, not defiance, shame, and in Mama's eyes, an ache that pulsed with something too big to name. The pain of raising something you love, and watching it slip out of reach. The grief of knowing you can't hold someone back from their own darkness. The silent prayer that maybe, just maybe, being seen with tenderness would make him remember how to feel it. They stayed like that for a long time. When Mara finally stepped back, Mama brushed a hand lightly over the scratch near her eye, not to heal it, just to acknowledge it. They didn't speak for the rest of the visit. Even Willa stayed quiet, like the woods had told her to hush. When they left, the clearing felt colder, like a fire had gone out, and the smoke still lingered. Mara didn't tell her grandmother about the scratch. She didn't need to. Some stories were too sacred for kitchen lights and adult questions. That night, she dreamed of Mama, standing between two paths. One led into the dark, one into gold light. Mama looked both ways, then looked down, and both paths were empty. Mara woke with her hand still curled to her chest, right over her heart, where a giant hand had once rested. It happened on a Tuesday. No warning, no time to gather anything except the clothes on her back and the sketchbook under her pillow. Mara's mom called from Richmond, voice tight and clipped. And just like that, everything ended. Her grandmother didn't argue, didn't explain, just told her to pack quickly, that the car was coming in 30 minutes. The air in the house felt sharp, like the world had tilted slightly, and no one had noticed except the girl holding a backpack too small for the weight she was carrying. She didn't cry. Not at first. She just kept looking toward the woods, toward the sliver of green behind the fence, where the pines held more of her heart than her own family ever had. Willa wasn't home. Her window was shut, curtains drawn. Mara ran across the yard barefoot, dirt still warm from the afternoon sun, and knocked until her knuckles stung. No one answered. The house felt too still, like someone had vacuumed the life out of it. Mara called out, just once, then turned back, heart pounding in that terrible, breathless way. The kind that has no place to land. She didn't tell her grandmother where she was going, just ran. Through the yard, over the fence, into the trees. She didn't take the winding path. She ran straight, cutting through thickets and briars, thorns scratching her shins. The sketchbook bounced in her backpack. She didn't stop until the clearing opened up ahead of her, bathed in the long amber spill of late afternoon. Empty. The old tree stood silent, unmoved. She tried the whistle, sharp, low, shaky from the effort. She tried again. Still nothing. So she sat, many hours. She traced the shape of her palm into the dirt. She whispered their names, not out loud, not like spells, but like memories. Flicker, Ash, Mama. Her voice cracked, but no tears came. Not here. Not yet. The sun began to dip, pulling the color from the world. Shadows stretched long. Somewhere, a crow called once, sharp and alone. And then, just as she stood to leave, a sound rose through the trees. Faint. Almost lost in the breeze. A whistle. Not close. But not far. She froze. And then, for the first time since morning, she breathed. She turned toward the sound, eyes scanning the tree line. And that's when she saw her, just barely. A shape at the edge of the woods. Still. Towering. Familiar. Mama. She stood with one hand across her chest, the same slow gesture, one that said more than words ever could. Her face was unreadable, but her presence filled the space like a hymn. Mara couldn't move. They stared at each other through the dusk. Mara took one step forward, and Mama didn't. She just watched, the forest still around her like she was part of its bones. Not a creature, not a ghost. Something older. Something sacred. Mara opened her mouth, but nothing came out. No goodbye, no explanation, just a breath that caught halfway and never found its end. Behind her, the honk of a car horn snapped the moment in half. Mara turned. The trees seemed to close in, suddenly too tight. Her legs moved before her mind did. She ran back. She didn't look behind her until she reached the road. She climbed into the back seat of the car. Her grandmother said nothing. Just adjusted the mirror and pulled away. Gravel crunching under tired tires. Mara pressed her face to the window. The forest sped past. And then, one final clearing. She saw her, Mama, standing alone. Motionless. That same hand on her chest. Mara raised hers, palm flat against the glass. The tears came now. Slow, silent. The car turned the corner, and Mama was gone. 3 hours later, Mara sat in her mother's kitchen in Richmond, pretending the world hadn't changed, pretending the food tasted like anything, pretending the ache in her chest wasn't louder than the sound of the fridge humming. Her mother asked questions she didn't answer. She nodded when she was supposed to, smiled small, said she was tired. That night she lay on a twin bed in a room that didn't smell like pine or dust or old paper. She flipped through her sketchbook under the covers, fingers tracing the lines. Then she heard it, soft, faint, high and distant. A whistle. She sat up, held her breath. Nothing followed, but she swore she heard it, swore it was real. She closed her eyes. And this time, when she dreamed, the clearing wasn't empty. The sky wasn't cold. And Mama was watching. She always had been. 5 years is a long time. long enough for a child's voice to stretch and deepen, long enough for skin to toughen, for memories to warp at the edges like paper left in the sun. But some memories don't fade. They wait. They stay sharp. They live in the spaces between heartbeats, in the way a shadow falls just right across a road, in the shape of a tree branch against the sky that makes something in your chest lurch before your mind catches up. Mara came back to Braddock Hollow the summer she turned 11. Her mom said it was just for a few weeks, to help Grandma with the roof and keep her company. Mara didn't ask why now after all this time. She didn't ask about Willa, or the woods, or the old trail behind the fence. She just packed quietly, like someone slipping into a dream they weren't sure they wanted to wake up from. The town looked smaller, the street signs shorter. The gas station on the corner had a new awning, and someone had painted over the graffiti by the bus stop. But the air still held that scent, humid soil, crushed pine, the strange sweet rot of fallen apples and heat. It hadn't changed. Not really. Her grandmother hadn't either. Still thin as a sapling, voice like cracked wood, eyes like she was always 3 thoughts ahead but too tired to speak any of them. Mara dropped her bag in the same old room, ran her fingers across the windowsill where dust settled in the exact same curve as 5 years ago, and then she left. No words, no announcement. She knew the path. Her feet remembered better than her voice ever could. The fence was still there, but the boards had slumped more. The moss spread farther. Beyond it, the trees rose up like they'd been holding their breath since she left. The trail behind Willa's house, if you could call it a house anymore, was nearly swallowed in ivy and silence. The windows were dark. One of the shutters hung loose, creaking when the breeze shifted. The mailbox had caved in. No cars, no bikes, no chalk drawings on the porch, no Willa. Mara stood in the overgrown yard and waited. Not for someone to come out, but for something to move. Something to twitch behind the curtain or shift in the shadows. Nothing did, so she turned and headed toward the clearing. The forest pulled at her. Not in a soft, romantic way. In a hungry way, like it remembered her bones, like it had missed her. Like it had missed her, like it was disappointed she stayed away so long. She moved slower than she used to. She didn't hum, didn't whistle. Her breath stayed low in her chest, and every step made her heart thump harder against her ribs. When she reached the tree, her feet sank into the same moss. The sun still found that same angle, cutting through the branches like a blade. She stood there, alone, the notebook from her backpack clutched in her hands, and she called out, not with words, but with sound. Not with words, but with sound. The whistle. She still remembered it, twisted and breathy from a throat older than it used to be, but it was there. The forest didn't answer. She tried again. Still silence. She sat beneath the tree, her fingers curled in the moss, her legs crossed like they used to be, her sketchbook resting on her knees like a prayer. The wind shifted. The woods creaked, but nothing came, so she waited. Longer, and then the light began to die. Branches stirred, and something moved. Not a squirrel, not a deer. He stepped into the clearing like a storm spilling over the ridge. Slow, solid, broad-shouldered and taller than any memory. His fur was darker now, tangled in places, with streaks of mud and old scars like stories written in silence. Ash. Mara froze. He didn't. He stared at her like he didn't recognize the shape in front of him, like he was trying to decide if she was real, or if she belonged, or if she was prey. His breath came in short, sharp bursts, his hands clenched. The muscles in his shoulders bunched and shifted. Then he moved. Toward her, fast. Mara scrambled to her feet, heart thundering, blood cold. She stepped back once, twice, and he closed the gap. His growl was low, guttural, not from his chest but from deep in something darker. She didn't scream. She couldn't. He stopped a foot away, looming over her, eyes black and unreadable. No glimmer of memory, no trace of the boy who once caught her when she slipped from a tree limb. Just this stranger, this force, this threat. She whispered his name. Ash. Nothing in his face changed. Then his lip curled, not into a smile, into something worse, and he stepped forward. She stumbled back, hit the tree with a thud, bark scraping her arm. He raised a hand, not to strike, but not to comfort either. And then a roar ripped through the woods like thunder breaking bone. Ash's head snapped to the side, and from the shadows a shape lunged, massive, wild, Thorn. She'd only heard Willa mention him once. A male, older than Mama, rarely seen. His body hit Ash like a landslide. No words. No warnings. Just fury. He grabbed Ash by the neck and yanked him back with force that shook the clearing. Mara sank to the ground, arms around her knees, breath coming in short gasps. Ash didn't fight. He didn't growl again. He just hung in Old Thorn's grip, muscles tight, eyes lowered. Then she appeared, Mama, from the same direction she always came, quiet, heavy with grief before a sound ever passed between them. She didn't run, didn't reach. She looked at Mara, long and deep, and Mara, bruised and scraped and shaking, stared back. Mama didn't speak. Of course not, but she knelt, just barely, and brushed the dirt from Mara's cheek with a hand that trembled, then turned away, took a step, stopped, looked once more over her shoulder, and in her eyes, regret, not for her son, but for the pain that lived between them now, for the trust that might not grow back, for the girl who once sat beneath her tree and whistled like she belonged, and for the silence that answered now. The air was thicker that morning, like the woods were holding something back. The sky had no color to it, just a dull, smeared gray that pressed low over Braddock Hollow like a wet cloth. Mara stayed inside. Her grandmother had said something about the storm coming in from the west, about loose shutters and power outages and stocking the pantry. But none of it stuck. Her feet were already moving before the words left the room. She hadn't gone back to the clearing since Ash lunged at her, since Old Thorn dragged him off like a misbehaving child. And Mama stood there, like a woman who had already lost too much to stop what was coming. But something in Mara wouldn't let her stay away. It wasn't courage. It was need. She didn't bring her sketchbook this time, just a bandage still clinging to her cheekbone, scabbed over but not healed. She wore the same hoodie she'd had on that night, partly out of habit, partly out of superstition. If something had shifted, maybe retracing the exact steps would help unshift it. The forest greeted her the way it always did, quietly, indifferently. The trail was more overgrown now. A fallen branch blocked part of the path, and she had to duck under webs that hadn't been there a week ago. The closer she got, the more the silence changed. It wasn't peaceful. It was watching. The clearing didn't feel the same. The light was flat, the air unmoving. The tree, her tree, stood still in the center like it knew it couldn't protect her this time. She stepped in, slow, and Ash was already there. He wasn't hiding this time. He was waiting. Standing where Mama used to stand, near the old log, shoulders square, hands curled at his sides. His eyes locked on hers the second she crossed into view, and he did not look happy. She didn't speak, neither did he. The space between them cracked like thin ice under a stranger's step. She thought maybe, just maybe, he'd softened. Maybe that moment, being dragged off, humiliated, held down like a threat, had done something, reminded him. But he moved first, one step, then another. His eyes narrowed. Mara backed up. Ash picked up speed. She turned. Too late. His hand hit her shoulder, hard, and she hit the ground sideways, a cry slipping out before she could bite it back. Dirt filled her mouth. Her elbow scraped sharp against a root. He loomed over her, breath fast, chest rising and falling in shallow, angry waves. His lips pulled back just enough to show teeth. Not fangs, just enough to say he could. She didn't recognize this version of him. This wasn't the boy who caught her when she slipped on a rock, or the one who silently handed her half a plum 2 summers ago when her stomach growled. This was someone else. She flinched, bracing for something worse. And the world cracked open. A roar erupted from the tree line. Low, deep, not angry, punishing. Ash's head whipped toward it, and he barely had time to move before a wall of muscle slammed into him from the side. Old Thorn. This time, there was no ceremony, no slow warning, no display, just action. The older male had Ash by the shoulder and spine, twisting him away from Mara like he was ripping rot from the roots. The younger one tried to push back. He did, but it wasn't even close. Old Thorn shoved him to the ground so hard the dirt jumped. Ash growled. Old Thorn growled louder, and then, like smoke from a match just lit, she was there. Mama. Not with thunder, not with fire. Just presence. She stepped out from the edge of the trees, walking past the struggle like it didn't even register. Eyes locked on Mara. Mara sat up slowly, hand pressed against her ribs. Dirt streaked across her jaw. Her whole body trembled, but she didn't cry. She looked at Mama like a daughter looks at someone who once gave her safety. And Mama looked back like a mother who knew she couldn't give it anymore. She walked closer, not fast, not slow. Just sure, she didn't help Mara to her feet. She didn't reach for her hand. She stopped in front of her and knelt. Her eyes scanned Mara's face, not with panic, with ache. She reached out and touched the edge of the scrape on Mara's cheek. Her hand was warm. The touch was so gentle it almost hurt. Mara closed her eyes, just for a second. When she opened them, Mama was still looking at her, not with guilt, but with something heavier, the kind of sadness that doesn't apologize because it knows apology isn't enough. The kind that knows love doesn't always stop the damage, that sometimes it simply stays through it. Mama pulled her hand back, stood, turned, and didn't say a word. She didn't look at Old Thorn, didn't look at Ash, now slumped against a tree, panting like a cornered dog. She walked into the woods and let the shadows swallow her whole. Mara sat there long after the last sound faded. The pain in her arm was dull now. Her ribs ached. Her knees were scraped raw. But none of it hurt as much as the silence between them. The kind of silence that used to be sacred. Now, it was just distance. Space where something used to live. She stood up on her own, shaky, but standing. And the trees didn't stop her as she walked away. They let her go, because even they knew. Whatever that was, it wasn't over. The bruises had turned yellow by morning. Not blue, not red, just that dull, sickly yellow that makes you feel worse because now no one asks if it hurts anymore. Mara stood in front of the mirror in the guest bathroom of her grandmother's house, hoodie zipped to her chin, fingertips brushing the scab beneath her eye like it might still be raw if she touched it gently enough. She didn't look like a girl who'd been shoved to the ground by something not quite human. She looked like a kid who'd maybe fallen off her bike, slipped on gravel, tripped over her own feet. Something easy, something forgettable, but it wasn't. She hadn't told anyone. Not her grandmother. Not the man at the hardware store who asked how her summer was going. Not even the tired clerk at the gas station who didn't blink when she came in alone, dirt-streaked and glassy-eyed, and bought nothing but a warm bottle of Coke. She hadn't said a word, because the truth wasn't something people listened to. And even if they did, what could they say? What could anyone say about a creature that once saved your life, then tried to break you open like you were nothing more than a twig in the way? She walked back that day. Not to the clearing, not toward Mama. She didn't think her legs would have let her if she tried. Instead, she wandered into town, tracing routes she used to know. Past Willa's old bus stop, past the rusted swing set behind the church that hadn't swung in years. She ended up behind Willa's house, standing at the spigot where they used to wash their hands after sneaking into the apple orchard, where Willa once dared her to drink straight from the hose. She turned the handle. Nothing. The pipes groaned once, like an echo from underground, then fell silent. The silence stretched. She stared at the spout for a long time, not because she expected water to come, but because it felt like if something could come out, anything, it might feel like forgiveness, like permission to start again. Then she walked. The sun was high, but it didn't feel warm. She passed the old storefronts. A dog barked behind a fence. She nodded at someone she didn't know who might have once known her. She didn't stop. Didn't speak. The bell above the door of the general store jingled like it hadn't aged at all. The man behind the counter was older than she remembered. His eyes flicked to the bandage on her hand, but he didn't ask. She bought a Coke. No words, just cash and a nod. On the way out, she stood near the ice machine, cracked the can open, and let the fizz burn her throat on the first sip. It was warm and flat and perfect, not because it tasted good, but because it tasted the same. When she got home, her grandmother was napping in the chair with the TV humming low. Mara didn't go upstairs, didn't draw. She went straight to the bathroom, turned on the shower. Hot, too hot. She stepped in anyway, let the steam burn her lungs and her skin turn red. Scrubbed at her arms until her nails bit the skin. Washed until she didn't know what she was washing off anymore. Not dirt, not blood, something else. She stayed under the water until her legs felt weak, until her chest ached from holding everything in. Later, she sat on her bed with the sketchbook she hadn't touched in days. It took her a long time to open it. The pages were smudged with old graphite and little pieces of the past. Flicker laughing. Willa smiling. Mama with her hand across her chest. She stared at a blank page for so long it started to blur. Then she picked up the pencil and drew a mama, not standing, not kneeling, but turned away, not walking, not vanishing, just turned, like someone who heard her name and chose not to answer. She didn't cry. Not at first, but something leaked from behind her eyes before she knew it. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing graphite across her cheek like war paint. She closed the book, held it to her chest, lay back on the bed, and for a long, long time, she didn't move. Because pain doesn't always come when the bones break. Sometimes it arrives in silence. Sometimes it wears a familiar face. Sometimes it just sits beside you and waits for you to feel it. And when you finally do, it doesn't leave. It lingers, quiet, like the sound of someone you trusted. Turning away, the doorbell rang on a Thursday afternoon, a soft, short chime, like someone who wasn't sure they were welcome but hoped anyway. Mara paused at the sink, hand resting on the rounded edge of her belly. She was 32 weeks along. The baby shifted inside her like a tide turning in its sleep. Outside, the sky hung low and blue. A cicada buzzed in the maple by the window, and the world felt exactly like it used to on the first warm days of summer. Before anything broke, before anything left. She dried her hands slowly, not rushing, not fearing. The second chime came. When she opened the door, Willa was standing there. Hair still wild. Eyes still too big for her face. Barefoot, of course. She looked older, yes, but not in the way adults looked older. More like time had passed around her instead of through her. Like the woods had kept her safe, or maybe just hidden. She was holding a grocery bag with both hands, knuckles white with the weight of something unsaid. Neither of them spoke for a second. Then Willa smiled, the same crooked, wide smile from a million years ago, from the clearing, from behind the fence. Her eyes filled before the words could form. And when they hugged, it wasn't gentle. It was a crash, like two halves of something that had been dropped, finally slamming back together. They stood on the porch for a long time, arms around each other, breathing the same quiet air. Then they sat in the old rocking chairs Mara had pulled out 2 weeks ago, when her ankles started swelling, and they let the space fill up again, not with explanations, but with presence. "I didn't know you were still here," Willa said eventually. Voice soft, like the old Willa was speaking through a tunnel of years. "I came back last fall, just stayed," Mara replied, resting her hand on her stomach. "There's not much left to run from now." Willa looked down at her hands. The paper bag sat between them on the floorboards. "My mom made us leave, right after everything happened. She said the neighbors were talking about food going missing, strange noises at night. She thought it was safer if we just disappeared for a while." Mara nodded, lips pressed tight. "I begged to stay," Willa added. "She wouldn't even let me say goodbye." A wind picked up. The chimes on the porch rattled softly. Mara didn't mention Ash, or Mama. Not yet. She waited. Willa's eyes shifted. "I don't know what you've heard, or seen, but I never knew that last part, about what he did." "He was hurting," Mara said after a long pause. "We all were. He just didn't know how to carry it." Willa nodded, and for the first time her voice cracked. "He used to be the gentle one, you know. Always bringing me mushrooms, helping me cross logs. Mama never worried when it was just me and him." They both went quiet. Mara's fingers curled over her belly again. "She's still out there," she said finally. Willa looked at her. "I think she is. I don't know why, but I do. I don't feel alone here. Not really." They sat until the sky darkened at the edges, the kind of dusk that feels more like a curtain than a color. A stillness crept in. The crickets hadn't started yet, and the light hadn't fully died. That's when Mara heard it, so faint she almost thought she imagined it. A whistle. High, melancholy. From deep in the trees, she sat up straight. Willa caught it too. Her eyes widened. Her fingers gripped the armrest of the chair. They didn't speak. Mara stood slowly, hand bracing her lower back. She stepped off the porch barefoot, toes sinking into cool grass. The whistle came again. This time, no mistake. Not wind, not bird. It was real. She followed it down the slope of the yard, past the old swing set, toward the edge where the grass met bramble. Her heart thudded, not with fear, but with memory, the ache of something lost too long. She reached the tree line and stopped. The woods didn't stir, but something rested on the grass ahead of her. Small, round, red. A single apple, fresh, its skin shining in the soft purple light of the early night. She didn't touch it. She knelt. Her breath caught. Her eyes stung. Behind her, Willa stood on the porch, watching, crying. Neither of them needed words, because that apple, that one small thing, said everything. It said, "I'm here." It said, "I remember." It said, "You mattered." It didn't explain. It didn't excuse. It just was. She didn't expect to see anything, and she didn't. But she felt it. Not steps. Not sound. Just presence. The same one that had knelt before her when she was 6. The same one that held her when she was scared. The same one that turned away when it hurt too much to stay. She stood again and whispered something into the trees. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a promise. She walked back slowly. Willa met her at the steps, held her hand like they used to, without thinking. They sat again in the chairs as the night came fully down. Somewhere, far off, a whistle carried once more, barely brushing the edge of hearing. And Mara smiled. Because not everything lost stays gone. Some things just wait to be remembered. Sometimes the things that change us the most don't come crashing into our lives with thunder and light. Sometimes they slip in quietly, through the hush of a forest at dusk, the sound of laughter carried on wind, or the weight of a silent gesture that says more than 100 spoken words ever could. Growth doesn't always look like strength. Sometimes it's just endurance. Sometimes it's choosing to open your eyes each morning and remember what was once too painful to hold. This story isn't just about mystery or fear or wonder. It's about the fragile threads we weave between ourselves and the unknown. The invisible bonds that stretch across silence, across species, across memory. It's about the idea that kindness doesn't require words, and trust isn't always born from understanding, but from presence, from patience, from choosing to stay when it would be easier to walk away. We carry so many versions of ourselves through life. Who we were, who we tried to be, who we're afraid we've lost forever. And sometimes, when the world grows quiet, we realize those versions haven't disappeared at all. They're waiting, somewhere in the woods, somewhere in the people who once saw us when we didn't yet know how to be seen, somewhere in the gestures that don't make sense until years later, when we finally understand the weight of a hand held to the heart. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about making room for what hurt us without letting it define us. Healing isn't a finish line. It's a rhythm, a slow return to something that feels whole again, even if it was changed along the way. And love doesn't always look the way we expect. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it hides in the spaces we left behind, still blooming long after we've gone. So if you've ever lost something you thought would never come back, if you've ever felt abandoned, but kept hoping anyway, if you've ever carried a memory so heavy it reshaped the way you walked, know this: some connections never truly break. Some forests never stop listening. And some goodbyes are just the beginning of finding your way back. Thank you for joining us for this story. If it stirred something in you, if a moment, a sentence, or even a silence made you feel less alone, please consider leaving a comment below. We'd love to know what stayed with you. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, filled with heart, mystery, and the quiet magic of being seen, don't forget to subscribe and join us next time. Because somewhere out there, something is still waiting, and some stories never really end.